Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. We're talking to Roger Allred.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, Roger.
We just moved to St. George about 6 months ago. Came from Bakersfield, California.
Well, welcome from Bakersfield.
Thank you.
Are you glad to be here?
Very glad. Wouldn't go back.
Was it that bad?
No, it was a wonderful place to live, but at this point in our lives, this is where we want to be.
I know somebody else that lived there for about 20 years.
I do too.
Who would that be?
That would be you.
Had to bring that up, didn't you? Oh, I brought it up. Tell me a little bit about your history, where you were born, where you were raised, what you did.
Born in Pocatello, Idaho, and raised mostly in California. Went to high school in Torrance, California. I went to BYU and worked in Salt Lake, and then went back to Bakersfield, and that's where most of my career was, over 30 years in Bakersfield, California.
What specifically took you to Bakersfield?
I was working for an oil company that was extracting oil from oil shale, and in the accounting department. I'm a bean counter by trade.
Is it possible to extract oil from oil shale?
Absolutely, absolutely. It just costs money.
How do they do that?
Heat and pressure.
Heat and pressure. Yeah. Does it actually work?
It works. It's just the price of oil has to be high enough to justify the cost.
How high?
I really couldn't tell you. I'm not a geologist. I'm just a bean counter.
Well, the bean counter ought to know what the cost would be.
I can tell you it was more than it was justified at that time, and as oil prices went up, a lot more people got into oil shale, and then when oil prices came down, they got out, and that's been the history. But it is there. It's available.
Is there oil shale oil in Bakersfield?
No, most of it's in Colorado. Colorado, Wyoming, even in Utah. There's oil shale in Utah also.
Is the price of oil high enough now to justify it?
You know, that's been probably 25 years ago, and I really can't tell you because I haven't followed it. I did a lot of things. I left that company. I worked for one of the astronauts who landed on the moon, drove the dune buggy on the moon, David Scott, in Lancaster, California. I worked for a power plant. I worked for a feed mill that rolled feed for dairy cattle. I worked as a bankruptcy trustee for failing companies. And all those were after working for the oil shale company.
Which was the most exciting one to work for?
Honestly, I really enjoyed one of the last one that I did, and that was working for a company that helped rehabilitate people with brain injury, because you could see the definite connection between what you were doing and helping people. Whereas when you're producing a product like oil or electricity or feed, you don't really see the connection with people. So I really enjoyed that.
You enjoy people more than oil then?
Well, yes, probably so, yes.
Tell me about your parents.
My parents are both from Star Valley, Wyoming, and every year from California, where I was raised, we made the annual pilgrimage back to Star Valley so we could see the relatives in the Holy Land. And
Star Valley is the Holy Land?
According to my parents, yes.
Are they still alive?
My mom is still alive, and that's one of the reasons that we came back to St. George, is because she's here.
She left the Holy Land?
Yes, she did. She did. Got out of the snow.
Some people think St. George is the Holy Land.
Well, some people could be right.
What did your father do for a living?
He worked for Save-On Drug Store. He was a drugstore manager. And he was the one who decided to leave the Holy Land because he couldn't stand the snow. And I share that with him. And that's one of the reasons we're in St. George.
But he moved to California.
He did.
And took you all to California.
He did.
You have children?
We have 9 children.
9?
9 children, yes. My wife and I have felt that's the greatest thing that we've ever done, and we love them all. They're all very good people, good solid people, and they're spread from Salt Lake City to the United Arab Emirates, to Seattle, Tucson, Georgia. They're all over.
How did you meet your wife?
We went to high school together. In fact, I took her to the senior prom.
In
Torrance.
Torrance, California.
Mm-hmm.
Was it love at first sight?
No, it developed over time. It developed over time.
How long did it take?
Well, let's see. We probably met when we were juniors in high school, and we got married when we were 22, so that's about how long.
Well, welcome to St. George. You have a great story to tell. You want to tell me about it?
My story starts with having a heart that was dying. I went to my cardiologist, and he said, "Roger, your heart is dying, and I can't just go to the shelf and take a heart off and give it to you, so we're going to have to put you in the hospital." So he made arrangements to have me admitted to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, which is the #1 hospital for heart transplants in the United States. They do more of them. And after 18 days in that hospital, I received a brand new heart.
How old were you?
I was 40, no. I was 60. I was 60. I was thinking about when my heart problem started. My heart problem started when I was 46.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I had what you would consider a pretty normal, healthy life. In fact, in 1996, I took my son and we climbed Mount Whitney in
How tall is Mount Whitney?
14,500 feet.
Is that above the oxygen level?
No, it's not, but it's up there where you're panting. You're panting to get your breath. But it's the highest mountain in the lower 48 states. And
this is in California?
It is. It's right out of below Bishop. It's in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so we did that hike. And I hiked 60 miles, summited Mount Whitney, and it was such a glorious experience. I said I want all my sons to enjoy that experience. I have 3 sons. And then shortly thereafter, my heart began to fail. And I thought that chance would never come again.
Did it fail while you were on the trip, the hike?
No. My heart was good. I mean, it took me to the top, took me to the bottom, everything was fine. It wasn't until about a year and a half later that I was sitting in my office and I had a TIA, which is a mini stroke, a transient ischemic attack, and it knocked me to the floor. They took me to the hospital, did some tests, and said, "Your heart is just not pumping properly." So they put a pacemaker in me at that point.
So you started out with a pacemaker.
I did.
Did that work pretty good?
It was. It worked very well. Pacemaker is a marvelous thing for people who have what I had at that point, which was atrial fibrillation. So it helps your heart beat more regularly, and that helped me. I didn't feel 100%. All my life, well, since I was in my 20s, I had jogged 3-4 times a week, about 3 miles, and didn't smoke, didn't drink, just didn't do anything. So I thought my health was going to be good, but my heart had different ideas.
Is it heredity, or?
It must be heredity because my younger brother received a heart before I did. So there are 2 transplant recipients, heart transplant recipients in my family.
Well, that's interesting.
It is. And I just hope and pray that I have not passed that gene down to my children.
Is there research going on to determine the gene that causes that? Or?
There probably is, but I have not been associated or involved with it. I've had doctors ask about it, but I don't know any studies that have been done.
Should there be?
Yes, absolutely. It would help. Absolutely.
Well, let's get it done.
Okay. I guess we need to come up with money first.
You know, you told your story at Rotary Club, and you elaborated more on it than you are here. So
Okay.
tell me more about the history of your problem and how it
All right.
evolved into a transplant. And
So at 46, I had this mini stroke, and the atrial fibrillation was taken care of pretty much by the pacemaker. But the pacemaker wasn't going to cure the problem, and my heart was sick, and it was dying, and the doctor said, "We don't know why it's dying, but it is dying." And so it progressively got worse and worse. And so we started with a pacemaker and some drugs like blood thinners and that sort of thing, and drugs that help the heart pump stronger and the vessels to be looser so that the blood passes through easily. So I was on a number of medications for those years. It got a little worse and worse over time, and then the doctor said, "Well, we're afraid that something's going to happen and you're not going to recover." So they took out the pacemaker and put in an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, which is just like the defibrillators that you see on television when they put the paddles on people's chests.
Where they hit them and they jump?
That's right, exactly. And so they put that here in my chest, and I have a little depression there where it was, and it goes under the skin, over the top of the muscle, and then they run wires through the carotid artery down into the heart. And so when your heart doesn't pump properly, that the pacemaker part sends a small electrical shock to keep it going. But then if it doesn't respond because your heart is progressively getting worse, like mine was, I had ventricular tachycardia, which means that the ventricles are not pumping, and they quiver. And when they quiver, they don't send enough blood to your brain, and that will kill you. And so they put this defibrillator in me, and that was all well and good, and off we go. And one day I was working in the backyard, smoothing some rocks. I can remember I was on my hands and knees smoothing some rocks, and all of a sudden I felt lightheaded, and I felt this hit to me. It felt like someone was inside of me with a baseball bat and had just smacked my rib cage just as hard as they could. And it knocked me to the ground. I was flat on the ground. And then I was still kind of loopy, and then it hit me again because apparently it hadn't shocked my heart back into rhythm. And
So this was your mechanism?
Yes, it was, which saved my life. But that mechanism, living with that in my chest for those years, creates a little bit of anxiety because you never know when one of these attacks is going to come. And when it does, it is very debilitating. Not painful. There's not pain. It's just a shock to your system. And so that defibrillator brought me back 11 times.
11 times in how many years?
Probably 5 years, in 5 years. And 2 of them were right at the end. So I was at home, and the pacemaker went off. And, well, actually, I was at home, and I took out the trash, and I came back in, and I was the only one in the house. And I was standing in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I felt this odd feeling, and I knew it was coming because I get lightheaded. So I sat down in the chair at our kitchen table, and the next thing I remember, I was on the floor and with a bump on my head, and I put my hand up to my head, and I pulled it out, and there was blood. And I couldn't figure out what had happened because I felt the cool of the tile on my cheek, and I wasn't sure what had happened. So I got enough energy that I could reach up, and I called my wife on the cell phone, and she came home, took me to the cardiologist, and he said, what happened was you had an attack, and it was so rapid that it knocked you to the floor, but you didn't feel it. And that's the first time I'd never felt it. So again, my heart was getting really bad. And then it hit you again. And he said, you're dying. You're dying. We've got to take care of this. And that was the last 2 times that the defibrillator went off, which put me in the hospital on the road to the transplant.
Did you believe you were dying?
Did I believe it? Well, I knew medically, yes.
The question is, how did you feel when he told you you were dying?
It didn't come as a shock because I had dealt with this for 13 years. And I knew I was getting weaker and weaker. It felt like when I was 46, I got old before my time. Before this incident, we had one of our sons get married, and we were fixing up the house for the reception at our house. And I was standing at the front door, and I opened the door and was waiting for the guests to come. And I looked down, and right in the flower bed in front of me, there was a single weed growing. And I said, I got to get that weed, because that's what I did. I took care of the yard, and I wouldn't want a weed growing in my flower bed. And I stood there.
For the guests to see.
Exactly. And so I stood there, and I've got to get that weed. And I stood there for about 10 minutes, and I didn't have the energy to walk down 2 steps, bend over, and pick up that weed. And so I was at that point in my life where I said to myself many times, I either have to get better or die, and whichever happens, it'll be okay, but I knew I couldn't continue the way I was.
And this is when you had the transplant?
Yes, it was.
How long did it take to get a heart?
Well, I was in the hospital for 18 days, and they have to, when they give you a organ, especially a heart, I can speak about that, they have to match certain things like blood type. Your blood type has to match. And I was a type O, and a type O is a universal donor, but you can only receive from an O. So therefore that eliminates the field of potential donors to me.
So the only one that could give you is an O.
That's correct.
But an O can give to everybody.
That's correct.
That's rather selfish.
Well, I didn't design it that way, but that's how it is. And they also have to match body type. So they wouldn't take a heart out of a small woman and put it in a large man. So they had to kind of evaluate what my body type was in order to match. And it's all about matching, and it's done by an organization called UNOS, U-N-O-S, which is a national federally funded organization that funds. And they also have match antibodies, so things that have built up in your body over time versus the things that built up in that person's body. And if those are going to fight, you don't get that heart either. So it's a very involved process. But thank heaven, thank the Lord, thank circumstance, thank UNOS, thank the donor family, everything matched up for me.
How do they find a heart for you?
This UNOS organization has, they're called organ procurement organizations throughout the nation, OPOs. And those OPOs go to the hospitals and they talk to the people who are in the hospitals and they don't look like they're going to recover. The person has to be brain dead, and that person has to typically die in some sort of tragic accident. You don't get live organs from someone who dies of old age or a disease. So typically it's people who have been in automobile accidents, industrial accidents, and they're brain dead. Two doctors have to certify that that person is brain dead, and then the family must consent unless the person has put on their driver's license that they are an organ donor.
So that trumps everything.
It does. At time, I don't know all the particulars, but I would assume that if there's going to be any sort of legal ramifications threatened by the family, they would probably back away. But
if that's on your driver's license.
But if it's on their driver's license, and that's important. So here in Utah, the organization that does that is yesutah.org. So anyone who has the willingness to do that, if they haven't already put it on their driver's license, they would go to yesutah.org and register as a donor.
And everybody ought to do that.
I believe they should. I'm here and alive because of people, of a kind, thoughtful family that gave me my heart.
Tell me about that.
I don't know much because it is kept confidential, and it's kept confidential for the family. So the family donates the organ, and then I receive the organ, and then I write a letter to that family every year thanking them for what they have done for me.
Who handles the letter?
It goes through this UNOS organization, through the organ procurement organizations, this UNOS, and then they coordinate so that the letter gets to that family. And the family can respond or not respond. In my case, they haven't responded, but I honestly understand, simply because people grieve differently, and it might be that they're just not to the point where they can deal with it, and I respect that.
There was a movie several years ago about a heart transplant. I'm trying to remember the facts of it, but the woman that got it or the man that got it fell in love with the girl.
Yes.
Is there any truth to that? Do you have any effects from the other heart?
That's a rumor. Obviously it makes no sense, no logical sense, because the heart is an organ that pumps blood and has nothing to do with affection or the mind. But the funny thing is that I've never liked spaghetti, just never liked spaghetti. And once I got this new heart, now I like spaghetti. So who knows? I'm not telling you it's the truth, but I'm just telling you that's the fact.
Have you had any side effects from the heart? Does it allow you to do everything you did before?
Everything. In fact, this morning before I came here, we went on about a 3-mile hike, and I go and do everything. It's just like I went from being a old man to being young again. And climb mountains, and ride my bike, and work in the yard, everything I want to do.
This 3-mile hike, how long did it take you?
About an hour, a little under an hour.
Well, that's pretty moving right along.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we were.
So you're young again.
I am young again, absolutely.
How young are you?
Well, my wife says I'm kind of annoying because I'm like I was when I was a kid. So, and yeah, she says at times it's kind of hard to keep up. But she says, well, I've got a 63-year-old heart and you've got a 22-year-old heart, so there's the reason.
Well, I'm only 45. The way reason I look so bad, I've just had a hard life. So
I see. Oh,
that's
good
the
for
lie
you.
I tell.
All right.
The cost of a heart transplant.
Yes.
Who takes care of that?
Well, we had insurance, and so obviously the insurance company covered most of the costs in our case. But there's a deductible to pay, of course, on an insurance policy. But I did see the bill for the transplant. Now, I had been cared for 13 years, and there were all those costs during those times. The pacemaker, in fact, I had 2 pacemakers and a defibrillator, and angiograms and echocardiograms and all sorts of blood tests. I mean, I must have been stuck 1,000 times to take blood. So all those costs are not included, but just the stay in the hospital, that 18 days, the bill was over $1 million.
And you went in the hospital and had a heart within 18 days?
Yes.
Explain that to me.
Well, it's a matter of I was most critical. So as we talked about, UNOS decides they do all the matching. So you can be on the list for a long time, but if you're not really critical, you're not going to get the heart. So the person that is most critical gets the heart. So some people think, you can buy organs. You can jump the line if you're famous or if you have lots of money. Well, that's not the case, because UNOS monitors, and it's the people who are the most critical. They're the ones that move to the head of the line. And so let's say that you're really critical, but at that particular time that the heart came, you had a bad cold or a flu, and that would cause a problem with the surgery. Then you are pushed aside, and the next person gets the heart.
So it's the one that needs it the quickest.
And is prepared, and their body is ready to receive it.
Is
yes.
there any distance requirement or?
The only thing that I know is these organ procurement organizations that are throughout the United States, they look within their organization for a person who needs. And if they go through their entire organization and they say, we have a heart or a kidney, et cetera, that we can't use, then they go to the next one outside.
What's the longevity expectation of a transplanted heart?
Well, the reality is that there's no way to know for certain. I've read statistically that there's the average lifespan of 10 years, but I also know people that have lived for 25 or more. I went to the cardiologist for a checkup about 6 months ago, and I talked to the cardiologist about my future. And I said, okay, so what's coming next? And he said, well, you're probably not going to live 30 years. Okay, I'm not sure that I want to live to be 90, but okay, I understand that. But in reality, heart transplants have not been around long enough to really test what the outer limits are. So when I was in high school back in the 60s, they were doing heart transplants. But the patients didn't survive. They either got infection and died, or they had rejection and died. Now they've developed such wonderful drugs that keep you within a band. And so it's a band that they monitor. So they don't want to suppress your immune system so much that you get the infection, but they need to suppress it enough that you don't reject. So these drugs keep you in the band, and that because of those drugs, heart transplants now are done and done successfully. But again, that it hasn't had long enough to really test the outer limits of the organ.
Do they still do the mechanical heart? Wasn't there a Jarvik heart or something?
Yes, there was. And I have not heard that that heart is been implanted in anyone. I know that they're still working on it. But I also know that people who are on the list and they can't find a heart, they give them, I think it's called an HVAD. In essence, it's a battery pack that you wear around your waist, and it has leads that go in, and it's mechanical. It circulates the blood inside of you until they can find a heart.
So it's kind of a booster pump.
Yeah, but it's not a lifetime solution. It's a temporary solution.
Well, it's very interesting. What can we do to get in line with that? You have a shirt on there that says donate for life.
Yeah, donate life, right. So one of the things that I did is I was so grateful for the heart that I received that I wanted to make sure that others had the same opportunity, and that all starts with advocating for Donate Life. So we go out and we have bumper stickers, and on social media we post things so that people know that it's important. And I think that the important thing about Donate Life, at least for me, was that people know that when you donate an organ, you're not just donating an organ to some old guy who's going to be in the hospital and going to die anyway. You actually give them a brand new life. And that's what I was given, was a brand new life, so that I can go from sitting in my house with my channel changer, can't pull a weed, to climbing mountains.
I'd like to talk more about your family. We've got 2 minutes left. Tell me about your wife.
She's an angel, and she has been with me through thick and thin. And, you know, as the mother of 9 children, plus me, that was sick for 13 years. Yeah, exactly. She's done wonderful things for me.
Well, that's good. Did she have a career?
Her career was raising our children.
That's great. Fantastic. That's the greatest career.
It is. And I do want to say that to tie this thing together, I had a goal to take my sons to Mount Whitney, and that was the culmination of my heart transplant, is that we, my wife and I, and 7 of our kids, in-laws and kids, climbed Mount Whitney. We were 60 years old, both of us, and so my 3 sons and I stood on top of Mount Whitney and fulfilled that dream. Fantastic.
Now, this is a 60-mile hike?
It was 60 miles, the route that we took. And so we camped. We were 6 nights in tents, and we made it to the top, and that was the most important part.
We got 1 minute left. What do you advise for young people?
My advice for young people was to do what is right, do the right things, take care of yourself, take care of those people around you, live the kind of life that you'd be proud of, so that when you're my age, you can look back and you can be satisfied with the things that you've accomplished.
Roger, you have a fantastic story.
Thank you.
And you're alive.
And I'm alive.
That's the greatest part.
It is.
Well, thanks for being with us. This is Lane Ronnow from the campus of Dixie State University. Thank you for being with us on A Story to Tell today.